Hi there, I'm nicodehaan, and welcome to Living a Primal Lifestyle, where we explore a return to a more balanced and natural wild world.
To recover our natural health and regain our rights and freedoms. I'm Ellen Dahan.
It's a beautiful day in Durango, Colorado right now, 69 degrees and going up to 75. Low tonight at 48 degrees.
Yeah, a good time to leave the windows open at night. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Odysee channel. Hit the follow button, hit the like button, help our channel grow. And we post on Facebook and LinkedIn for your convenience. And if you hit the link below the show notes, you can maximize your nutrition with 2 products from Mother Earth Labs. These are products that we use to supplement our diet. And we look at mainstream news stories about anti-aging, natural health, climate, history, as well as our freedom. We do our own analysis. All topics for today's show are in the show notes listed below in the description. And if you have any comments or questions, you can reach me at nicodehaan@me.com or just put a comment in YouTube, Odysee, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'll get back to you on that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see here.
Need your photos.
Oh yeah, photos. That's right.
Yeah,
Let me get those up.
We've been experimenting with this new platform, and it's really working out well. And so now we can share with you some of the. Where's your photo?
They're coming up. It's bouncing on me.
Okay. Wanted to share with you some of the fall pictures that some of the leaf changing and so on that we saw when we were in driving home from Colorado Springs and through the higher elevations in Wolf Creek Path.
I had it here for a second. Yeah.
Okay.
There it is. Finally. Oops.
Go the other way. Ah.
Sorry, folks. Yeah, there we go. So this one.
Pull it the other way.
Yeah, trying to find it. I got one.
Okay.
Just lost my.
Yep, there it is.
Ah, yes. 3 of them.
Slow down.
Sorry.
A chance to look.
This is a nice view right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like the one before it with
this one?
The orange tree.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll get this
welcome back to live TV. Okay. All right. That's our house, by the way, in case you're interested.
Here it is. Okay, first article of the day. Obesity rate in America. Overweight people are blamed despite research.
Despite research.
The vast majority of people find it impossible to lose substantial weight and keep it off. Medicine no longer sees this as a personal failing. In most recent years, faced with the reams of scientific evidence, the medical community has begun to stop blaming patients for not losing excess pounds. Well, we can blame the food.
Yeah, I mean, despite decades of fighting America's obesity epidemic, it's only gotten worse. And they say obesity increases the risk for 200 diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, asthma, hypertension, arthritis, sleep apnea, and many types of cancer.
Yeah, even with COVID-19, they said carrying substantial extra weight triples the likelihood of severe disease. And the link between obesity and severe COVID-19 is surprisingly strong, says Dr. Fauci, who dedicated his life to combating infectious diseases.
The data were so strong, Fauci said, following a recent government study. Even for children, every increase in body mass index led to a greater risk of infection with COVID-19 and for a dangerous case of the viral illness.
Yeah, despite more than 40 years of dieting and workouts, billions of dollars spent on weight loss programs and medical care, tens of millions of personal struggles, high bells.
Their story that's in the article.
Yeah, the obesity epidemic has only gotten worse. Nearly 3/4 of Americans are now considered overweight. More than 4 in 10 meet the criteria for having obesity. And certainly, if we look at some of those photos of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and even early 80s, there seems like a turning point in the 1980s, somewhere along the line, changed a lot. And I think that's the direct link that we're looking for.
And if you look at the advent of the cereals and the grains and the junk food and the McDonald's and the fast food stores, and that all coincided with the shift.
Well, remember in the 80s, it was that food pyramid where the most that you need to eat were at the very bottom, and always the grains and the breads and the pastas and those things. Yep. That's number one, what you should be eating the majority of your servings. And the next two categories, excuse me, were the vegetables and the meat, and they were smaller. And then you had the things like there's processes up there, but the very top was the smallest, which were the fats. So we were definitely skewed, and the information we got at that time that fat was really bad for you and you shouldn't have it.
Yeah, all of that conspired to create an environment in which obesity flourished. And so I'm looking down here in the article. Okay, go down to easy to gain, hard to lose. So the Tomas Horvath, who's a neuroscientist at the Yale School of Medicine, says, human body was evolved over tens of thousands of years to hold on to excess calories through fat. And he's quoted as saying, the default is to promote eating. It's very simple, very logical. And if it were not this way, you would die after you're born. You live out in the wild, you have to be motivated to find food.
Yeah.
And so let's see what else we got here in this article.
I don't think there's much more.
No, let's go on to the next one.
Well, I wanted to point out.
Yeah, go ahead.
This section up here at the very beginning, that they agree that people need to take a responsibility for eating as well as they can, for staying fit, for sleeping enough. And by simply promoting individual change, that won't end the obesity epidemic. It hasn't done that for decades, and we've been promoting a healthy thing, but subsidizing health food instead of, most of the foods that are in the grain category are being subsidized. So the farmers who have these large lots of planting just one thing like corn or soy or wheat, monocrops, are getting subsidies. So this makes the food a lot cheaper. So if we subsidize healthy food instead of those things, then I think we're more on the right track. Make ultra-processed foods healthier or scarcer. Well, ultra-processed foods are never going to be healthier. So unprocessed foods.
Just stop making these processed foods.
Stop eating them,
and
for
stop
sure.
building in the addiction elements that make people.
And remember, these foods are also in schools.
Oh, yeah.
And they're also in hospitals.
Yeah, of course.
So the whole system is screwed up.
Yeah, well, and these are the expert offers of different ideas that we can change the trajectory.
And it says
teach kids to better care for their bodies. Well, we've been talking for years about the lack of quality of the food and the toxicity of the food.
It doesn't seem to help.
And we were listening to quite a few speeches yesterday, and on YouTube we were watching some of these things unfold.
Rescue the Republic,
in Washington, D.C. And
that was for Sunday.
It was clear that one of the things that was brought out quite vividly was the fact that there are a number of elements in our foods, including the food dyes, the colors, and other things that are banned in other countries. Yeah. They're illegal to put in the food, and that the American food companies have two different standards that they produce the food in the United States using all of these toxins, but in Europe, they produce the same food without those toxins.
Exactly right.
So it's kind of scary.
To say the least.
Mhm.
Okay.
You want to go to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
The next one was a study from Harvard University, which seems to be putting out a lot of studies that have to do with eat more plants and less red meat.
Yeah, so that puts the study in kind of a bad light, beginning with. If your conclusion is up front that you want to put the population onto plant-based foods, you're not going to have
You're
good
going to
results.
write an article that supports that position.
I think so, and this
Right.
seems
So
to be the case. So this is actually part of the study, and I write up from that study, and then the next article is talking about what's wrong with the study.
Right. So we'll start with the study itself, which said red meat consumption associated with increased type 2 diabetes risk.
And right away, we thought together that, well, wait a minute, there is no glucose in red meat at all, or any kind of meat.
So how can there be an insulin problem
Yeah.
from eating red meat?
You would think maybe
They just kind of ignored that.
yeah.
People who go ahead.
People who ate just 2 servings of red meat per week may have an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to people who ate fewer servings. And the risk increases with a greater assumption, according to new consumption according to the new study led by researchers from Harvard.
From the Harvard School of Public Health.
Yeah, they also found that replacing red meat with healthy plant-based protein sources such as nuts and legumes or modest amounts of dairy food was associated with a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes.
You know, and right away I'm looking at this and saying, wait a minute, there are many, many people for whom nuts are a significant problem, and they lead to diverticulosis and diverticulitis, which is inflammation of the intestines because of little bits of nuts that get stuck in the crevices.
Yeah, so
and legumes, the beans, they go through and land in your colon.
Where you're trying to get rid of things instead of trying to absorb things.
So that, they go right through the small and the large.
Yeah, so the small and large intestines are where the absorption takes place. Then the colon, in the colon, the bile is added, and you're trying to encapsulate it so it can move out of your body.
Excrete, right?
Yeah. So if the majority of your food is carbohydrates and proteins that are plant-based, most of these things end up in the colon where they're not absorbed.
And that explains why you get gas from baked beans.
Sure. Right.
Never thought about that, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because it's
another fact in here where they're talking about the mainly when they talk about red meat, they're talking about
both.
They're talking about saturated fat, right?
Well, they're talking about processed and unprocessed.
Yeah, but they say they have this particular study also mentions that dairy products are going to be a less risk. Now, dairy products have a higher saturated fat than meat actually does.
Yeah.
And that's brought up later in the transcript here.
Right, right. Researchers found that consumption of red meat, including processed and unprocessed red meat, was strongly associated with increased risk of type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, participants who ate the most red meat had a 62% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared with those who ate less. Each additional daily serving of processed meats was associated with 46% greater risk developing type 2 diabetes. And each additional serving of unprocessed meat was associated with a 24% risk. Greater risk, yeah.
Yeah, the last paragraph in that section says, swapping red meat for healthy plant protein sources could help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and climate change and provide other environmental benefits. Well, that's been pretty much debunked in the general research.
Well, there's nothing better for the environment than grazing animals and fertilizing the land, so you can at least grow some things, but the things that are growing in the wild will naturally be attracted to these animals because they're going to be eating those things and they're going to be fertilizing the very ground where these things grow. So it's a great process. So by removing animals,
They also spread seeds.
yeah, and spread seeds around too,
Mhm.
for sure.
Okay, let's go. Now we get to the article in which the author has done extensive research into the study we just referred to and has counterpoint and finds some of the information to be incorrect. So now,
Yeah, so this is called Red Meat and Type 2 Diabetes by Zoe Hartcomb. So this week's study made headlines around the world and generated much interest. It claimed that having examined data from 216,000 people,
almost 217.
yeah, red meat intake, total processed and unprocessed, increased the risk of type 2 diabetes. This made no sense from the outset, the author says, as diabetes is a glucose, excuse me, handling issue, and meat contains no glucose.
So let's go down to the issues.
Well,
let's
it's more obvious
go
here.
to the introduction.
Yeah, well, he says more. It would be obvious to suspect maybe the buns and the fries and the fizzy drinks that the hot dogs and burgers are consumed
And not
with.
to mention the hot dogs being highly processed.
Yeah.
Okay. Introduction. The
This
eating red meat increases type 2 diabetes risk, the author says, makes no sense.
Yeah, diabetes is essentially the inability to handle glucose. Meat contains no glucose. Carbohydrates contain glucose. My immediate thought was, don't blame the burger for what the bun, the fries, and the fizzy drink did.
So, and we talked about.
And it also says it's the latest paper from Harvard, from the Harvard Epidemiological Paper Production Factory.
Epidemiological.
Thank you. And all the other papers promote plant and condemn animal foods. And this is just the latest attack on red meat.
Okay, now then it goes down to the study. Epidemiological studies, also called population studies, start with a large population of people. They gather lots of information and follow them for a number of years, continuing to gather information. Researchers then review the data to look for patterns. These patterns are called associations and are then supposed to be tested in randomized controlled trials. But today, randomized controlled trials are too expensive and take too long. So they just publish these associations, connections, these saying that, well, clearly it causes it, even though we have no evidence of that.
Yeah. So,
and they're happy for people to infer that A causes B.
First of all, issue number one is the inaccuracy of food frequency questionnaires. So these are questionnaires that self-reporting 2 or 4 years apart.
Yeah.
So you have to remember what happened 3 or 4 years ago. Are these people getting paid for these studies? Do they have a vested interest in answering these questions correctly? Nobody's under a microscope.
And people tend to fudge things because they don't want anybody to judge them, you know?
Yeah.
All right. And
there were different categories. In other words, when you were asked the question, did you have chicken without skin? Did you have chicken with skin? Were you eating hamburgers? Were you eating hot dogs? Did you have any processed meat? Did you have bacon? What kind of beef or lambs did you have as a sandwich?
Or a mixed dish.
Or a main dish.
And the fun part here was that apparently meat sandwiches and meat lasagna are considered to be meat.
Yeah.
Last I looked, the bread was not meat and pasta was not meat.
Yeah, the reporting intakes were calibrated.
Yeah, let's go to issue. That's one of them, and that means it was adjusted according to the researchers' biases and weighted in certain.
And what is a serving and what isn't a serving and everything like that. Yeah. So number 3 issue is the definition of red meat included sandwiches and lasagnas, just like you said. Yeah, so that really makes no sense.
And they lump together processed and unprocessed. They lump together things that are clearly not meat. And so it's... And
certainly they were not having a whole group of carnivores.
No.
And saying, okay, what's
this study was based on a whole bunch of studies that were done with nurses.
Yeah.
And
Issue number 5 says the intakes used have changed. So the reporting on the system that they used changed. So servings changed while this process was going
right,
on.
the size of
The size
servings,
and the
yeah.
size of servings
Mhm.
actually doubled in size
Mhm.
during this whole process.
Yeah,
So,
over the years.
over the years,
Yeah,
yeah.
and then it says men versus women. The study says women consume more red meat than men. Well, the study was about 3-to-1 women. So I don't know how
Yeah,
you,
so they took
how
the
you,
total
right, how you
of
come,
what meat consumption, and they said, okay, well, the women ate more.
yeah, 3/4 of the study was
Well, there
done
were
on
more
women,
women, yeah.
and so therefore,
And issue number 7 was processed red meat versus unprocessed. Other studies I have reviewed,
says the author of our article.
yeah,
Processed red meat has the highest claimed risk. Unprocessed red meat has the lowest risk, and the total red meat is somewhere in between. But this study claims the total red meat has a higher risk than both processed and unprocessed red meat. And total red meat is the sum of the other two. So how could it be worse than each of the separate components?
that makes no sense
It makes
either.
no sense. No.
Issue number 8 is the health person confounder. Healthy person confounder.
Yeah.
So the red meat intake is never the only difference. In this table, the highest red meat consumers had the highest BMI, where they
body
were,
mass index.
yeah, they were less physically active, and they were more likely to be current smokers and less likely to take any multivitamins. There's also a healthy person,
There's
always a healthy person confounder.
And the problem is, they didn't take in the burger hot dog consumer is also eating the buns and the French fries, and they didn't take into consider. They didn't separate out just the red meat.
Yeah. Also mentioned here that calorie intake was then adjusted for, but it was obviously wrong to start with. Any adjustment would have been wrong. So the paper ignored this alone.
Should be ignored.
Yeah, should be ignored.
Yeah, and it said there were things missing from. They got a lot of tables in here that you can take a look at for yourself. But the point was that there are many food groups missing.
Yeah, there are 9 food groups. There was meat, fish, eggs, dairy, vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, legumes, and grains. There is also sugar, which is not a food group, but which is prevalent in processed foods, and which
it has an unquestionable impact on type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
And so they left out sugar.
And they left out grains.
And they left out grains.
So for a lot of people, that means they left out breakfast.
Well, and they left out lunch, and they left out dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and they go on to say that the body mass index could have been higher because grain and sugar intake was higher, could have been higher because activity was lower. And there's so many other characteristics and contributing factors.
Yeah, and then your number 12, association is not causation. Number 13 is relative versus absolute risk. Never accounted for plausible mechanisms.
Okay, so
saturated fat.
So they suggest. So the study suggested saturated fat, which is high in red meat, can reduce beta cell function and insulin sensitivity. And the answer, the rebuttal to that from this author is red meat is not high in saturated fat. Meat is mostly water. Protein is usually the next major part. And of the remaining part that is fat, there is much more unsaturated than saturated fat.
Yeah, the main fat in meat is invariably monounsaturated fat. Dairy products are the only food group with more saturated fat than unsaturated fat. And in this study, it showed
they didn't study dairy at all.
What they did show is that the dairy products had a lower
Yeah.
rate of insulin resistance.
Yeah,
So,
all right. Then the next thing the study said was
about iron.
Heme iron increases oxidative stress and insulin resistance and impairs beta cell function. But in fact, according to the rebuttal, poultry and fish provide this heme iron, not just red meat, but they didn't talk about poultry and fish. And then they also said that A number of groups of people are at risk of iron deficiency, and heme iron is the optimally absorbable form.
Yeah.
You know, so eliminating it from your diet would do you some damage, I would think.
And also, there's mentions here, processed meats often have a high content of nitrates in their byproducts, which promote insulin resistance. We also read an article a couple of weeks ago about the nitrates in these products, even processed nitrates and added nitrates can increase your acid, your nitric acid, which is the cleansing of the arteries and things like that. So there's a lot of things in here
They
that they
said,
don't talk
well,
about.
how about if we're looking at the high concentrated nitrates and the byproducts, what about looking at the burger buns, the fries, the fizzy drinks,
Yeah, then look at
and
that.
what their impacts are on insulin sensitivity and resistance?
And then they have a nice quote here from Thomas Latimer.
Thomas Latimer Cleve.
Yeah. He was a surgeon captain, and he says for a
In
modern
the military, and he lived from 1906 to 1983.
Yeah, for a modern disease to be related to an old-fashioned food is one of the most ludicrous things I've ever heard in my life.
Close quote.
And the last statement here is the ultimate test for red meat and type 2 diabetes would be the examined carnivores.
Which that hasn't been done.
No.
Okay. Next, is canola oil heart healthy? You know, we've been in a mystery about what exactly canola oil is. And so I was glad to read this article and get some clarification. Because some people, it's sort of the conventional wisdom that.
Well, I think the confusion is because it was used in manufacturing for ball bearings in Canada, lubricant instead of oil, which was a lot more expensive.
Petroleum-based oil.
So it was a cheaper way of lubricating machinery. And then somewhere along the line, the FDA came along, and somebody in the FDA, I forget who it was, but went into one of these labs and tasted the oil and said, hey, it has no taste. It's very inexpensive, and we could use it in food and make food a lot cheaper.
Okay, so Canadian scientists created canola oil using selective plant breeding techniques to produce a food-safe version of the rapeseed plant, because the rapeseed plant actually has toxic compounds, so it's not safe for human consumption.
Yeah, so canola oil is derived from the seed of the canola plant, and most canola oil sold and used in the United States is highly refined, meaning it goes through a multi-step refining process that includes bleaching and deodorizing. This process also uses heat and chemical solvents such as hexene, which have been shown to be a neurotoxic. Yeah. The result, the refining process of canola oil improves the characteristics like taste, color, and shelf life. However, the process strips the oil of protective nutrients and compounds like vitamin E, the polyphenols, and making it less nutritious.
Now they say there are some benefits and some downsides to canola oil. So it says that the problem is that the studies that were associating canola oil consumption with improved health outcomes used unrefined and unheated canola oil, but most of the canola oil that's available in the United States is heated.
Yeah, so they're looking at a product which is a little bit better, which really doesn't exist in the consumer market. That's for sure.
Okay.
So a study that included 72 patients with the
polycystic ovarian syndrome
found that the participants who consumed 25 grams of the canola oil per day for 10 weeks experienced significant reductions in their triglyceride levels and their low density lipoproteins.
LDL and HDL cholesterol ratio.
Yeah. As opposed to the people who had the same dose of olive oil or sunflower oil. However,
this study used unheated canola oil and refined olive oil, which could have affected the results. As unheated canola oil contains fewer harmful compounds than heated canola oil, and refined olive oil contains fewer beneficial substances than unrefined.
So they used the worst of the olive oil and the best of the canola oil, and they came up with their substance.
Which is not available here. Okay.
Then there was another study,
Another study showed that
olive oil.
what? Where are you here?
Refined olive oil was more effective than
Ah.
raw and unheated canola oil in lowering the inflammatory markers in people with heart disease.
Okay. But
Vitamin E boost, they say, like many plant oils, canola is a good source of vitamin E, and tell you what the vitamin E
it
does.
says unrefined canola oil is higher in this protective nutrient, as the refining process significantly reduces levels of vitamin E. And that means that what's available in this country is not going to help you with
Exactly.
vitamin E.
So in addition to its affordable price, canola oil has a mild taste and a high smoke. And that's really why
High
restaurants,
point.
yeah, so all the restaurants and the fast food places and the frying,
Deep fat frying,
people are using this. And remember, back in the 50s and 60s, even in the 70s, people were using lard.
Mhm.
They were straining it on a daily basis, getting the contaminants out, and then reusing that. And that works fine. That's what we do with our cooking methods. We use lard. The problem with canola oil, it's rancid before you even get it. It's not strained usually. Some restaurants may strain it, but the fast food places don't strain it, and they use it for up to a week.
Or who knows
and,
how long.
and they reheat it and reheat it every single day, and that's where the
And now
problem really
it points
lies.
out here that while canola oil has a high smoke point, repeatedly heating it to high temperatures leads to the production of harmful compounds like free radicals and trans fat.
Yes. And canola oil also contains a high alpha linolenic acid, essential for omega-3 fatty acids. However, I don't think it's.
But then it goes, the same article goes on to say, but if you'd like to boost your intake of heart health promoting omega-3s, it's best to do it in the form of seafood or an omega-3 supplement.
Yeah, and remember that there's plenty of omega-3 and a good balance in red meat also. Yeah, they don't mention that here at all. They talk about the risks of canola oil. Yeah. Repeated heating canola oil is a common practice, and cooking methods like deep frying can lead to the formation of harmful compounds, including trans fat, which has been shown to have a negative effect of overall health and increased heart disease risks.
And one study showed that repeatedly heating canola oil increased trans fats in the oil by 233%. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oils that are repeatedly heated, such as canola oil used in deep fat frying, also contain harmful compounds like free radicals, which damage the cells and promote inflammation in the body.
And that goes along with all the other, some restaurants are using peanut oil, and the same thing applies there naturally. So, and then it just goes on to tips for
about omega-3 and omega-6.
Yeah. Also talks about the types of healthy fat consumption. And they list here olive oil, avocados, nuts, seeds, nut butters, fatty fish, of course. We would prefer lard, animal-based fats. They
nuts
last
and
a long
seeds,
time.
There's a lot of information available in the research that seed oils are not good for you.
Yeah. And the only one we ever use is the sesame. Yeah, the smallest seed possible.
Yeah. Okay.
So then we have one more article here.
Sourdough bread. We love sourdough.
Yeah, and this is the only bread we really consume. We thought we'd put it in here. We don't use it often, but maybe once a week or even less.
And we're talking about what I do is when I buy a loaf of fresh baked sourdough bread.
Yep.
And I cut it into sections that are about that thick.
About 1.5 inches.
Yeah, 1.5 to 2 inches thick. And then I freeze the bread.
Yeah.
And then I'll take out one of those. And, the sections are about that big because it's a loaf of bread, long loaf of bread. So we put it, then I'll defrost just the one section.
And then we split that.
And we split it. And then we'll use dipping oil. We use olive oil that's seasoned. I use basil and parsley, salt, pepper to season it. And then, or just put some salted butter on it. And I warm it up first, obviously, defrost it and warm it up.
Yep.
And and I definitely have a gluten intolerance, and but sourdough doesn't affect me the same way that anything else does.
So the article says, is sourdough bread actually healthy? Here are the top benefits from this fermented bread. And that's the key. It's fermented.
It's fermented, right?
Yeah. So read that first part.
So,
Interestingly enough.
Sourdough bread does boast quite a few health benefits when compared to many conventional unhealthy bread options that are found at the grocery store, especially from a digestive health standpoint. Sourdough bread is anti-inflammatory, which benefits overall health.
So what is sourdough bread? Like most other breads you'll find in the grocery store, sourdough is a leavening bread. Leavened bread, or one that contains rising agents. But instead of relying on those conventional envelopes of active dry baker's yeast, sourdough is leavened by something called a starter. Sourdough starter is a living culture of microbes like lactic acid bacteria and wild yeast that are cultivated from flour, and it's made with the air it's exposed to. When mixing?
Okay, when mixed with flour, water, and salt to make bread, sourdough starter ferments the flour in the dough to produce natural leavening. That's rising. This fermentation also helps break down some of the proteins that are found in the flour, including gluten. And yes, I didn't realize that gluten was, I never thought about it, but apparently gluten is a protein.
Yep. So potential health benefits of sourdough bread has many benefits over regular bread that makes it healthier in some ways. First of all, it's full of fiber. And
it's full of soluble fiber, which I think is important.
Well, there's some insoluble there too. Yeah. This can only help you feel fuller for longer and improve digesting. I think it does improve digestion. As far as feeling fuller doesn't mean you're satisfied.
Right.
You can eat a whole bag of chips and feel full and still eat a lot more.
Right.
So the thing that makes you satisfied most of the time is fat, a healthy fat. An animal fat, most likely. There are some other fats that may help that process, but generally known that the satiety really comes from eating a lot of fat. And our diet is boasting maybe 80 to 90% fat in most cases. So we're very satisfied. So
it says
it prevents diseases. This is one of the things.
Yeah, and it says it's what they're saying is that the sourdough bread creates a prebiotic effect.
Yeah.
It's not a probiotic because the microbes do go away when they're baked.
Right.
So speaking of and then the gut biome, microbiome, immune system, immune health also benefits from the prebiotic support that sourdough offers. This is because the microbiome helps to regulate inflammation throughout the body and modulate the mucosal immune system. Biome has been tied to risk reduction for a host of chronic illnesses.
Yeah, interestingly, a recent study found that older adults living in the Mediterranean who regularly consume whole grain sourdough bread has a lower risk of chronic illnesses, including heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. And this immune boosting mineral zinc is found in whole wheat sourdough, and that may amplify this benefit.
Right.
At lower blood sugar, of course, because you're not spiking anything.
Right.
And the other thing is sourdough bread's fiber, potassium, phosphorus, and sodium content all support a heart-healthy diet. The soluble fiber found in sourdough bread binds to dietary cholesterol in the small intestines, helping pass this fat through the system instead of absorbing it. This helps prevent osteoporosis. Yeah, and this
hardening of the arteries.
Yeah, and this kind of has been debunked anyway, so I don't know if
we talked a lot. Watch our show from last week. It talks about cholesterol and there's a lot of information about cholesterol.
So,
but it also says that potassium, phosphorus, and sodium are major electrolytes in the body that help to maintain heart healthy rhythms, while potassium is linked to better blood pressure regulation, and both of those are important for heart health.
Yeah, and improves body functioning. Arguably, the biggest benefit of sourdough bread is the lactic acid bacteria, which lowers the bread's pH. It works by deactivating phytic acid or phytate, which is a anti-nutrient that binds to minerals and makes it more difficult for the body to absorb them. So sourdough bread generally has less phytate than regular bread, which means your body gets to absorb the nutrients.
More
and that
nutrients.
more nutrients.
Mhm.
And this is the problem with a lot of carbohydrates. They're bound up in such a way that the nutrients are not bioavailable to us, and they end up in the colon where the nutrients cannot be released anymore,
Mhm.
and they just go through the body.
Okay. Now, is there any drawback to sourdough bread? It just says that it's not inherently gluten-free.
Yeah, because of the way it acts and is fermented, the gluten doesn't seem to be a problem for most people. You have problem with gluten,
I have some sensitivity. I tend
Yeah.
to get inflammation from it.
right? And you do not with, of course,
Yeah,
we
with
don't
sour-
need a great quantity.
No.
That may have something to do with it, but
And
generally,
once a week, we have maybe a little bit of sourdough bread,
Yeah.
but it doesn't affect my body at all, you
No.
know. But it does say sourdough bread has improved digestibility for the gluten sensitive, but it still has some wheat protein. And because of this, those with celiac disease or severe gluten allergies should avoid sourdough.
yeah. So we've been on our diet. We started when we met. We started,
Not too long after
we
we
started
met.
kind of low carb. We were still a little bit into the low fat, and then we decided to up our intake of fat. And I think at that time we started at about 50-50. And then we discovered paleo diet about a year or so later. And that was about 15, 20 years ago, I guess.
Mhm.
We started paleo. And slowly we started eliminating things. And as we started eliminating things like vegetables and most breads and beans
Cereals
and cereals and those things, we kept getting better and better and better.
Mhm.
And then for a while, we did eat nothing but meat. And now we add a little bit more seasoning, a little bit more herbs, and a little bit sourdough bread now and then. And
And a little
sometimes
bit
these
of
little crackers that we have where we want a
almond
little
flour crackers that don't have gluten in.
Yeah, we have a few of those, and we put a big slab of butter on them, and it's basically a vehicle to add more fat into our
Carrier
diet.
for the butter.
Carrier for the fat. So
Yeah.
our diet now is 80 to 90% fat and about 20 to 10% protein and very, very little carbs.
Mm. And I don't,
Almost no carbs.
and I found that, I was on Wednesday night, we like to go out to dinner. It's our date night. And I was eating some broccoli or some, with my dinner. And I, all of a sudden, it just wasn't agreeing with me.
Right. So you start
So I
eliminating that. So
stopped.
now most of the time we'll have a piece of meat and nothing else with it.
Well,
And I'll have a nice beer that has a little bit of carbs, but not too bad. Makes you feel good. So, but that's what we're on, and we've discovered more and more. And I think what we said earlier is they start taking all these people who are on a carnivore diet, and if you look at them on YouTube, you find out they look pretty good. They look pretty healthy.
Well, I think that one of the things that's important about the YouTube reporting is that a lot of these people have had debilitating, almost deadly complications of autoimmune diseases and arthritis and all kinds of things. And when they went on the carnivore diet, all of those symptoms went away and they got off of all the medications that they were on. And it certainly helped.
Yeah. I think if we just skew our ideas of that meat isn't bad for you anymore, and just get that out, I think we'll start seeing healthier people, because all our ancestors are meat-based. There was no indication of any indigenous people anywhere in the world being vegetarians. That's a relatively new thing. And they're promoting this because the food companies find it much easier and much more profitable to have this type of food that isn't meat based, because meat spoils rather quickly. Even fresh vegetables do. So that's why they promote grains. That's why Kellogg's came out.
Boxes of things.
Yeah, and if you look at the history of these cereal companies, especially Kellogg's, you find out their motives for promoting this type of food were not very good. They weren't based on health.
Well, they were not people friendly.
No, they were psychotic people, basically.
No. I'm talking about the motives were not intended for the good health of American
No,
public.
no. So do your own research. We highly recommend that, and we appreciate you sticking around and watching this. And hopefully you did. Otherwise, you wouldn't hear this, I guess. Okay. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for sticking around.
Be well.
Bye-bye now.
Keep your sense of humor.
Yeah.